Now, you have a fair bit of experience in other parts of the world. Let's start with Asia Pacific, because I'm always very fascinated by that region, how it seems like I learn about something, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then I learned that, you know what? If you like go to Japan or Korea or China, they've actually have been doing this for quite a while. Y- I mean, recently in Toronto, our subway system got Wi-Fi, which was very exciting for a lot of people. And then I spoke to some friends abroad, and they're like, yeah, we've had that for like 20 years now. And I'm like, oh, thank you. That makes me feel really good.
Yeah. I mean, I told you not to get me started on the reverse culture shock that I've experienced coming back to Canada. But there's lots. I mean, Asia excites me to no end. Every aspect of it, the way that they blend tradition, right? They're not afraid to like hold on to a lot of traditions, but they're still pushing forward from a technological standpoint, and they're embracing, you know, a move forward, right? In both in societies and in the way that they operate and apply tech. Um, I think there's a lot of learning that we as Canadians sometimes we're a little complacent, and we think everything's just been going so great. It's going to keep going great, and you know for people that I talk to that live abroad or that see have been around the world quite a lot, I think they're starting to see that there's some challenges that Canada's going to be facing fairly soon that, we should be looking to places like Asia Pacific for a lot of ideas. But also I think there's a lot that we can offer that part of the world too. And so I've been working with the Canada ASEAN Business Council, trying to help build trade corridors and raise awareness of the opportunities between Canada and Southeast Asia, which has, been really fulfilling actually, that we've been seeing a lot more progress in that respect recently. So I think it's starting, but as things do in Canada, they tend to move slower than you want them to, but at least they're moving in the right direction.
Well, and that gives me hope. The fact that we are looking in other places, and some of our decision makers are aware. So it's not that we're not open to exploring ideas. But the reason I wanted to speak about, I suppose, Asia Pacific was what you mentioned, which is they're able to retain their traditions and culture, but also benefit from technology and utilize these things and enhance their way of life, which gives them more time, I would say, to focus on some of those cultural and traditional aspects of their lives. And I fear that with AI, sometimes we may lose that. But when I look at that part of the world, it gives me hope and says, no, you know what? It's possible for us to retain, uh, again, our cultural way of life, while being able to employ these technologies for good, and that will result in like a very net positive result, versus being concerned that by introducing these things we're just losing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a great example is like the tradition of how older people live in Asia, right? They stay in the family. Usually, as they get older and they can't look after themselves, they'll move in with the kids. And there's a benefit because the grandparents are kind of there and they're close to the children. And so you have that sort of like babysitter also at home, that extra pair of hands. But it also keeps the older people engaged and socially engaged also, and just so there's less dementia, there's less all these things. But as some of us know, like there's pressures on families now too, where you're looking after kids and you're looking after your parents as they're aging, and so a lot of to maintain that family value that you see a lot in Asia with having keeping parents in the house, they're applying all these great technologies to help older people stay at home and help older people sort of live and be for the parents not having to worry about the grandparents necessarily being at home, and so they're monitoring and having all these technologies to kind of support the systems that they value. I think that's where we have to learn what we value, right? What do we think is important that we need to maintain, and then don't replace it with technology, but then find out how you can reinforce it with technology, right?
That makes sense. And I mean, I believe it is there. They have the robot nurse, Grace, I think is her name. it's really fascinating. I mean, I had this idea of we should like have like like Roombas, like AI powered Roombas, and just give those to senior citizens who are in need of help, and they'll like track them and monitor and make sure that everything's okay, right? Um,
Sure.
but it comes back to again having trust in that technology, and that's another aspect when we look at AI and marketing is how do you establish a trustworthy brand where when I think about AI, for instance, like it has all my data, like it has everything. And how do I ensure that it's not going to do something that I don't want it to do?
Yeah. Well, it's good you're asking that question. Um, Talking about Roombas, I actually interviewed the inventor of the Roomba um, not too long ago for a project I was doing with LG. And it was actually all about AI. And what was happening was this was before ChatGPT and before all that. We were starting to see a lot more consumer AI. If you think about your phone, if you think about your Google Home, if you're thinking about all of these applications you have, a lot of them are powered by AI, right? The Netflix shows that are being presented to you. And again, going back to like media literacy, there's a lot of people that just didn't know that they were already using AI, right? It's only now that people are actively using it because of ChatGPT primarily, and the ilk. But what the whole program around with this LG project was to start to, help think about the human who is going to be the end user of these AI systems, to think about them from the beginning. Because what's happening is a lot of, not they're not doing it on because they're evil, but there's a lot of like there's a lot of technologists and there's a lot of developers and programmers that are in the lab and they're building these great systems, these great AI systems, but they're not thinking about how it's going to be used at the end of the day, right? Is it going to be taking people's information? Is it going to be hackable? Is it going to be giving them biased information, right? Like there's a lot of issues and that they're not necessarily considering because they're not thinking of the human, they're thinking of the technology first. And so this project was really about how do we build more design thinking into the process? How do we build more, what's the AI UX? And so the project was called AIX because we're trying to come up with this like, artificial intelligence experience and how do we build better experience for AI? And then ChatGPT came out and it's, that world changes so fast. So I don't even know how relevant all of that stuff was a few years ago. But we were having those questions, all these questions you're asking, we were asking those questions 5 years ago. And even then it felt like things were changing really quickly. So as long as we keep asking those questions, we'll be in a good place. It's when we stop asking those questions, we have to worry.
Part of it is our regulatory environment, I suppose, and ensuring that we're protected, like consumer rights. And another chunk of it is also, again, you brought up media literacy, and I completely agree with that. And also, I suppose what I would call like data literacy, like knowing what's happening with your data,
Mm-hmm.
what you're giving out, what it means. And I mean, I've had this discussion before, but like those user agreements, the EULA agreements,
Yeah.
I've never read one.
No.
And so I feel that there needs to be a change with that because realistically, like I've been told that those things can't even stand in court because it's well known that no one reads them. And so you don't actually have true consent with those. And so how do you ensure that you're doing the best for the end consumer in that regard where yes, you're going to be collecting their data, but like for instance, in the open banking example, you collect data, but it's for the benefit of the consumer. They fully know what you're going to collect and for how long you're going to keep it. And I feel that we need to have that type of agreement with some of these other things too
Yeah. I
around
mean,
AI.
with COVID, our homes became our offices, they became our schools, they became, I think we're inviting this technology into our homes, we're using it in our cars, we're using it in the street. More and more governments and are installing cameras and, we're being monitored. And so you're right, like there's a big privacy issue, there's a big security issue. But on the flip side, people are also willing to share so many things on their social media feeds, right? That we would have thought that's very personal. So are we coming, as people, are we coming to a new understanding of what is privacy? What is my data? Is it mine? Is it all of ours? Like, what is it actually saying? Like, if if you looked at the data points that, you only need, I think, 100 data points to be able to like influence someone to do what you want, right? And so there's understanding sort of people's emotional sort of behaviors and how they react to things. If you're a pessimist or an optimist, right? Like how to make someone react differently based on who they are and their personality. So there's a lot of dangers when it comes to having this data, but at the same time too, so much of it's noise, and it's not good data. If you think about all of those forms you filled, have you always put your real name? Have you always put your real birthday? Have you always put, you know what I mean? Sometimes I purposely don't, just because I want the data to be a little bit messy, because I don't want people to know exactly about me. So I think, we're seeing people who, design sort of face masks that they can wear in the street, so that the cameras can't identify their, facial recognition and stuff like that. So there's always going to be a pushback
Right.
on these kinds of things. And it's interesting to see, and it's interesting to consider. There's some U of T has Stephen Mann was a professor there. I think he still is, but he's someone that had these VR goggles way before anyone else, that he would walk around and all the billboards would be changed into art. So he didn't want any advertising. So anytime he looked at an ad, it would replace it with fine art. So
hold on. So these are wearable goggles.
He's kind of a cyborg. So he's implanted a lot of technology into his body. So you should look him up. He's an interesting guy.
This is Stephen Mann?
Yeah, I think that's his name. Yeah.
Okay. Oh wow. So he's become a bit of a cyborg, and he has these goggles that will transform ads into art.
Yeah, so he basically programmed it so that anytime he looked, like he was walking down the street, if he saw an ad on the side of a bus, that it would automatically replace that ad with something more visually pleasing to his eye.
Oh wow.
Right? So you can, again, like, use these powers for good. You can use the same technology that's being used to harvest your data to skew the data, or you can be using the same technologies that are trying to put ads in front of you to actually replace those ads. So there's always going to be a balance. I think the market will always find a nice, safe balance where people will accept or not accept certain things. And we're right now pushing the limits, I think. And so it's expected that there'll be some pushback.
Right. Yes, cyborgs. I mean, I've heard about robots. I've heard about like robot servers, and obviously, I believe Elon Musk has implanted a Neuralink chip successfully into someone. So we're definitely going within that realm, and it's fascinating. But personally, I'm also a little bit wary of how far will this go.
Yeah.
But again, I feel that that's why there is pushback, and that pushback is what will sort of keep things in line so that we don't go too far to a point of no return.
Yeah. I mean, so Neuralink's a great example because when I first started in marketing, I was working at a hospital just over here called Toronto Rehab. I believe it's part of the OHN network now. But there was Dr. Milos Popovic who worked in the spinal cord rehab center, and he was a brilliant researcher. I think he's in charge of its programs called KITE now. And this must have been 25 years ago now almost. And he was implanting chips into, I don't know if he's implanting them necessarily, but he was definitely reading people's brain scans and allowing people with spinal cord injury to like remote control airplanes and stuff like that, or like to use a mouse, just thinking about how they wanted it to move. So this technology's existed, and it's already being applied in medical areas. So it's kind of, that's something that we see a lot of, is things that have like these commercial uses in industry, or in a lot of times the military, or in space exploration, right? They'll push the limits of these technologies, but then very quickly we'll see them come to market and see them be turned into actual, consumer goods, which, it's happening faster. I think that the speed that's happening now, we're reading about some kind of far-fetched technology, and then all of a sudden, like, we have it, and so I wonder if that is going to get, that timeline is going to keep shrinking, where well, a good example actually, maybe where it's actually starting to reverse is I was reading an article about how that Mars helicopter that recently was having some technical issues, and I think it finally stopped, but super successful program. They just could not get it to be light enough using the standard NASA protocols and for radiation shielding and stuff like that. And so they ended up turning to, the consumer drone manufacturers and using just regular drone parts. And it was this huge success. It brought the cost down like crazy. It flew, I forget for how long on Mars, but it didn't really have any problems. So in a lot of ways, consumer tech now is getting so good that it's starting to reverse even, which is interesting.
That that is interesting. I hadn't heard about that. I'll have to look into it. Um, but I mean, yeah, space is another area that's very fascinating, and there's a lot of innovation there. And um, I'm not sure if they're still going ahead with Elon wants to send people to Mars, I believe,
Yeah.
and they were not going to return. And like the advertising around that and how that was presented to people was very interesting, where it was sort of poking at your sense of exploration, but also like the betterment of humanity. Hey, you're going to be helping people. You're going to be helping a whole civilization
Sure.
by going off into space and
Or
never
being the
coming
first
back.
person to implant a chip in your brain. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's always going to be someone who puts their hand up for that sort of thing. I'm of the mind that I'm there's certain technologies I'm willing to be at the front of the bell curve, and then there's some technologies I'm happy to be at the back of the bell curve, and I'll let other people experiment with that stuff until I finally get my brain chip or decide to go to Mars. I'll let other people blaze that trail.
Yeah. Uh, that sounds very reasonable. Uh, Now, we earlier on we were discussing financial services and wealth management. One of the big trends that we saw for a while, and I'm sure we'll continue to see for a while as well, is advisors are leaving like the large firms and they're going off on their own. And I feel like this is where they require help with things like branding and marketing. And so if if you were to advise an advisor who has, let's say, a successful book, they've been with, a large corporation for over a decade, and now they want to strike out on their own. Like when they think about their marketing and what their marketing needs are, like what are some of those thoughts that they should be having?
Yeah, I mean, so personal branding um, is an area that is evolving, as all areas are. But I think people's expectations of um, you know, individuals working for themselves is different than corporations, right? And so I think there's a certain amount of personality that needs to shine through. So my recommendation always, whether it's to CEOs of major companies or to independent people, as much as possible, I think it's okay to be yourself and to be authentic is in the first place. And then secondly, like have a point of view, even if it's a little bit risky or if it's a little bit, not the norm, to to spur a little bit of controversy, to get people talking, to get people to consider alternatives and think differently. If you're going out there and you're selling the same thing as everyone else, saying the same thing as everyone else, then don't be surprised if your clients choose someone else, right? So you have to stick your neck out a little bit and be a bit brave that way. But there's no magic formula necessarily, and I think, again, it comes down to relationships and building personal networks and being on the ground and shaking hands and looking people in the eyes. I think is still super important. And I think something like wealth management, that would be extremely important. So those would, be my general advice. Like you have to kind of be out there. You have to have some LinkedIn posts and be vigilant at keeping on top of that stuff. I mean, I know I personally wish I had more time or did it more religiously, but there are people that set very strict calendars for I will post something, and they think a week ahead and really plan it all out. And I think that's the right way to do it. And when you read something that you think is really interesting, don't just share it. Share what you think about it. Share what is interesting about it. Give something back to your audiences, and people will start to reciprocate and remember you. And then that's where it starts, is sort of just being top of mind, because then when you are looking for a wealth manager, it's not like I'm sitting around all the time thinking about wealth managers, right? But then when you do need one, who's the first one that comes to mind? Well, it's that one that is in my feed a little bit more than the others, and the one that has a point of view that's a little bit different than the others. And so maybe I'll talk to that person, right? So it's about just being differentiated.
Yeah, that's very true, especially because in Canada, we do have a smaller population than our southern neighbors. And so you do have to be very precise with, who you're going after and who you're trying to target, because there aren't that many Canadians that can be your clients, particularly because some of these industries, they're very saturated, I would say. And so trying to at this point, in a lot of cases, unless you're trying to get the younger generation who is starting to build up their wealth, and I've heard of the acronym Henry's recently, which is High Earners Not Rich Yet, which I think is quite fascinating. And that is, again, and there's been different acronyms for these individuals before, where you go after the market that isn't quite where you would want them to be quite at this point, but you're going to help them get there, right? And so when you're a part of that journey, again, you create those meaningful interactions, and you would have higher loyalty with your client base if you were to take that type of approach. Now, of course, advisors who may be leaving and striking independent, part of the goal would be to hope that they have strong enough relationships with their existing clientele that their clientele would want to move over once they learn that their advisor has left the firm. But again, it's about having, to your point about these different strategies, and being, I suppose, mindful of the platforms that you use. And this is where, again, things like social media can be very impactful. As long as, of course, you're sending out the right messaging and the right information across.
Yeah. I mean, again, like if you're giving something, right, and you're not just advertising, but you're providing a value to a community. Again, I think that's where the social media can start to generate and build community. So if you've got really good wealth advice, or you have a really unique way of sharing that wealth advice in a way that people can consume it and understand it. Like we're seeing more wealth management experts on TikToks, right? And doing short vids, doing really quick, like, here's me with a credit card. Here's how, like, I'll show you how I do my bills. I'll show you how I budget. I'll show, like, show, don't tell, right? When you start doing that sort of stuff, it endears people to you. It's like, wow, this person's willing to help me figure this stuff out. So again, when it comes time for me to actually, make my millions of dollars, who am I going to turn to? It's going to be that person that helped me when I didn't have millions of dollars. And McDonald's and Happy Meals, like this sort of marketing to the next generation, and it's well known in this industry, and how young's too young, or how poor is not rich yet. You know what I mean? Like what levels? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself, and that's where market research and stuff is really important also.
Definitely. And I do believe that point you brought up about establishing that trust, where if you are more of a public figure and you get out there and you say, hey, I can help you, then people come to know you as someone that has helped and who is reliable and who knows what they're doing, right? It's like, oh, when I didn't know how to budget, this is the person I turned to. So now that I have money, Of course, they're the one I'm going to turn to, which makes all the sense in the world. How can, let's say, an industry that's very conservative have the right boundaries to use these platforms, if that makes sense? Like, how can they think about this? Is there a process they can go through? Because again, you mentioned this before, but like, it's not really something that they can ignore forever. Like, it's here, it's staying. And so they need to figure out a way to get on there. And I've had some discussions with people in different firms who seem to be kind of struggling with this as well, which is, yes, we know it's there. We're just not sure how we can get on there.
It's easier to say no. It's easier to be the person that doesn't do it, right? And that lets the next person try to do it, right? So a lot of it comes down to a bit of fear of the unknown. The way I did it, I'm a communicator, so I find like I can reduce everything down to a communication challenge. usually it has to do with awareness and understanding internally. All of those blockers, the people that are telling you can't, why, right? Like asking them why, and then understanding like, well, that can be solved. Those are you can work around those. Great example is when, again, I was telling you how I helped introduce social media to a lot of pharma companies. Pharma being similar to wealth management or to the finance industry is quite conservative, obviously huge regulations, and they were really worried. The lawyers were all very worried about adverse event reporting. So pharma companies need to report to governments whenever something negative happens on a drug, and they post it on social media. They like if it meets the certain requirements, they have to alert it. And you don't, as someone who sells a drug, you don't want to highlight too much how many people are having adverse events, right? So they didn't like the idea of social media because they were afraid that it was just going to invite all this adverse event reporting, and everyone was going to jump on and say things about their drugs. And the way we got around it was that, we invited the legal team to sit with the social media team for a few months. And they sat right next to each other. And every tweet, they'd look over their shoulder and be like, yeah, okay, you can say that. Right? And it was probably after 2 or 3 months that we did a meeting and we said, okay, so how many adverse event reports did we have to handle? And like how much extra work was it? And was it as big a problem? It's like, yeah, no one goes online and talks about how I took this drug for this medical reason and it had this, gave me gas. Like it's not something that people want to talk about. So very quickly, the legal team kind of relaxed a little bit. We put in the right mechanisms so that if there was any reporting, that it was very quickly monitored and things like that. And so there's always a way around it. And I think it comes down, again, to communication. So find the people that tend to be blockers, introduce them to it, show it to them, have them sit together, have them work together in a way to find a solution where it's like, okay, well, maybe we can't go full blast on social, but there's some ways that we can dip our toes and we can start trialing this. I would always recommend that, I'm not a no person, I'm a yes person. So if you find those no people, turn them into yes people by just, communicating effectively.
That makes sense. So it's getting the people that are hesitant because of legal or compliance or whatever reasons involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that would be a winning formula, because once you get people involved in a process, they tend to get excited too, and they want it to work. So that's very good advice. Now, let's speak a bit about branding. So because all these firms, of course, have their own brands in the marketplace, and you can use social media platforms for that as well to enhance your brand and to ensure that, like I've been hearing the term stale when it comes to certain firms. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to be a stale firm, right? Who's just sort of stuck in the old ways and is not taking advantage of the socialization methods that we have now. But brand differentiation, establishing your brand, like let's talk about the financial industry, for instance. Like, again, we said that they're all very secure, so that's not a way they can differentiate themselves. They can differentiate themselves through other means, which such as experiences. But now we speak about an advisor who may have left, and now they want to create a brand for themselves and differentiate them from perhaps where they used to be, or differentiate themselves from maybe the corporate umbrella, because they feel like, oh, now maybe I can do things more, I can do things more quickly. How should they go about like trying to establish their brands?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first you have to understand the difference between brand and branding, right? So branding is like the logo, and it's the colors and the fonts, and it's how you apply it to your stationery and your email signature and things like that. A brand is rooted in the behavior of the organization, right? And it's meant to be sort of a symbol of trust in that organization. And trust is built by following through on promises, right? And so reputation is sort of this view of the past. Trust is sort of a promise of the future, right? If I use this, it will do, it'll benefit me in these ways. And so the best way to establish trust is to, commit to something, right? And follow through and show people that you follow through, right? The act, don't talk. And again, social media can be a great way to do that because it's a platform where it's like, well, here's how I do it. Here's what's being done. And you will build trust through action, not through words. So that's one aspect for sure. But then you also have to just be in front of people, right? Your brand is only so good as the people that know it and believe in it and want to reinforce it. So if you can be there when people need you, then they'll be there when you need them. And so again, building community around a brand is sort of the new way of, I shouldn't even say it's that new. It's actually an old way, but with social channels and the ability to create, groups within different platforms, we're seeing that a lot more where people are curating, uh, audiences and building sort of communities out of those audiences. So it's not just talking to everybody. I'm talking to people that are inherently interested, and they're interested more than just interested. They're actually willing to be participants. And so if you can share the same values, if your brand can share the same values as your audience, then you're winning. It's a winning formula. And if you can demonstrate it, and you can show it, and you can act on it, then you're building trust.
Hmm. That's fascinating. You have so much experience within the marketing realm. Can you give some examples of how people go about building those communities? And
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it in Web3 a lot. Like Web3 has been really good at creating these sorts of communities. Now, it's younger people, a lot of them, that have a shared passion for technology and for disrupting the status quo that we're seeing in the world. And so Web3 to them is sort of like taking the internet back from the corporations. And so, that's where the shared values come in. And so the organizations that are building these decentralized networks, those communities are very active. And so a platform like Discord is used quite a lot, or Telegram, where you create these groups. And it's just, like for me in my old age, like I find a lot of it to be just like the way that it's just the information is just kind of in a stream. I don't enjoy it that much, but I think for young people, they're used to it. It's just a constant stream. It's like of consciousness from the community, and it just keeps building and building, and more people jump on, and everyone putting their voice in, and everyone thinks their opinion's important, so they share it. But again, the best communities are the ones that acknowledge those opinions and take them on board and be like, hey, that's a great idea. Let me try to implement that. And now all of a sudden you're co-creating this brand and you're co-creating this service and this product and this offering with the community. More people want to be part of that. Now I'm part of something bigger, right? Now I'm part of, and people crave community. So that's typically how it's done. Now, is it easier to do it with like cool brands like Nike and yes, probably, right? Like wealth management, less sexy, I think, to especially people that don't have wealth yet. But there's room there to build communities as well, I think. And they might be a little bit smaller, they might be a little bit more tight knit, but we're talking about an industry that doesn't have a huge marketplace as well, right? Like there's the 1%, or the, maybe 10%. But the fact is that they still have questions. They still have, the world is scary right now for everybody. And so if there's someone that's standing up and helping them make sense of the world and what do I do with my money and should I buy gold? And there's lots of questions, right? So if you can help answer them, then you'll build community. You just have to find the right platform. I don't know necessarily if, depending on their age, if they're going to be on Facebook. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be using Telegram or Discord. So that's where I think a lot of research is still important to understand who your audience is. Where are they already? Because you want to go where they are. You don't want to force them to go somewhere where they're not, because they won't.
right. It's interesting. During the pandemic, I saw a lot of like Twitch streamers who were day trading.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think they were doing a bit of a disservice because they would, of course, enter the trade and then all their followers would go and enter the trade afterwards because they would mention what it was. But like some of those guys would have like 70, 80,000 people live watching concurrently. And so there definitely was or is still, I believe, appetite for that type of information. And so when I think about it, if you are an advisor who's trying to now establish themselves, like maybe you go and you post like a weekly video, and especially if you show your credentials and people feel like they can trust you, and you just start small, like 15-minute, like weekly, like what happened in the market this week updates. um I feel like that would be a great way to like start building that community. And yes, probably a large chunk of those people may not end up becoming your client, but you will find some, and they will be worthy, I feel. um, so that's actually a really good point, and a great way that you can build that community is by using these different channels, as you mentioned. um, I was very fascinated when I learned that you worked for Coke, I believe,
PepsiCo
or
was one of my
PepsiCo.
clients. Yeah.
Yes. So the reason why I was fascinated is because there's always those like Coke versus Pepsi
Hmm.
challenges. And since we are speaking about brand and differentiating, I think this is a good example of like how those two brands establish themselves and try to differentiate themselves. So can you speak a bit about that? Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, just to clarify, like the work I did with PepsiCo, we didn't really touch Pepsi. We didn't touch the individual product brands too much. It was actually a lot more around like sustainability and developmental projects with people in places like children, and like, we did a lot of like positive communications work for the company, for the corporation, for in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. But yeah, I mean, just based on my experience, how does Coke differentiate from Pepsi, and how do they keep on top of people's minds? Like, there's a lot of tricks, right? If you think about a lot of marketers look at the user journey, right? And you have to think about what are the touch points. And if you think about when you buy a Coke or a Pepsi, when you make that decision, and it's in a grocery store or it's at the gas station, right? And you have a fridge there with Coke and you have a fridge there with Pepsi, and they're super branded. But then as you walk in, how many times did you see a Coke ad? How many times did you see a Pepsi ad, right? How many in shopper marketing, right? There's science behind this stuff. When I worked with GSK, they had a whole shopper lab. It was basically a recreation of a drugstore or a corner store, and they would practice. They would have people come in and they would be like, okay, well, if we had a dangler over here, or if we had, this new technology or a touch screen here, like how will people use it? What part of the store should we put it? Like, there's so much science and data that goes into advertising because it's such a big business. And people don't realize that. They don't realize that they're being manipulated to some degree. And so if you like Pepsi or you like Coke, it may come down to taste, but it also may come down to the who manipulated you better. So it's not the most positive way to look at the industry. But if you think about taking those same tactics and that same budget and that same effort, and you put it towards drinking water or saving the environment, imagine the impact you could have, right? So that's where, like, I think a lot of companies should start thinking about their advertising and their marketing is using those same tools and using that same energy, but doing it in a positive way as opposed to trying to just get me to drink more sugar water.
right. It's it's very interesting, and especially one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you was because I learned about your firm, um, and I was really fascinated by how you've established it and how you're trying to focus on what I would say the future of work, where you. I suppose why don't you explain what it is, and then I'll ask a few questions about it.
Sure. I mean, it's probably better if I tell you the story of how I came about it. So, when I left big agency, um, I started working on my own because I had the experience. Freelancing wasn't such a dirty word, right? The gig economy was kind of becoming a thing. I was still in Asia at the time, and I really enjoyed working for myself. I loved being able to. I was at the time. I think I was on a beach in Thailand for a while, just working and making money, and like this is great. No bosses to tell me what to do. I set my own deadlines, and I can work how I want, where I want. Um, but what happened really quickly was I started to get lonely. I started missing colleagues, and I started missing what I really loved about agency was the diversity of the people and being able to, work across, different markets and brainstorm with people from around the world and all of that sort of stuff. And, as I made my way back to Canada, I started to realize, well, what if, I've been hearing about the agency model being broken for a long time, but no one's really tried to fix it. No one's really tried to make a recommendation for what it could look like if you took out the shareholders, if it wasn't all just driving all the value upwards to the shareholders and forcing young people to work to the bone, essentially, which, or sometimes free if you think about the way that interns are used in the industry. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like about big agencies, but there was a lot of stuff I did. And so I thought, well, what if we just recreated everything we love about big agencies? Being able to work with really cool people, being able to organize ourselves with different disciplines and build these interdisciplinary teams to solve big problems for clients, right? And big campaigns and award-winning campaigns and really creative things. You can't really do it on your own, but you can do it with a global group of really smart people who are all working for themselves. And more of those people are opting not to work in corporations. And, CEOs are deciding they still want to stay in the game, but they don't necessarily want to be CEOs of a corporation anymore. So those people have a lot of knowledge. Let's tap them. Let's bring together all these really, really smart people, and let's give them a platform where we can innovate. So we have people from different backgrounds. So take someone who has a sales background, and then you take someone who's got a marketing background, and you build a new product, and then now you have BriteBirch to help promote it. We have sort of a referral network that's going on too, so people are helping each other out and finding opportunities. And as and when clients come to us and say, "Hey, I have this challenge," you can either go to a big agency and you're paying for all these hidden costs and these fancy offices, and there's P&L issues that people don't realize that happens behind the scenes of how agencies work. And so it's not as easy to do multi-market stuff, and it's not as easy as you think to kind of get those interdisciplinary teams. Or you can hire freelancers, and it's like herding cats. How do I know that they're going to work well together, right? We're kind of fitting in this new area where it's like, well, we'll do all of the herding for you, and we'll make sure that everyone is buying into this concept of working collaboratively. So to be in BriteBirch, you have to buy into this idea. And then when clients have a challenge, then we build the team that they actually need, the team that fits their budget, that fits the speed that they want to go. If you require someone in a certain place, we'll put someone from that place. If you require a certain perspective on the team, or someone that can think a little bit outside the box, right? We'll bring that person in. If you need a technologist, if you need a management consultant, if you need someone from a specific industry who's got years of experience, we can bring those people into the team. And so the teams that we're building don't look like regular marketing teams. They look like super duper, like talented, experienced teams that, because everyone's got experience too, it makes my life easier. It's a lot less hand-holding. Everyone just does the work they want to do, and everyone sets their prices, and I don't dictate any of that. So it's an interesting, new model, and we're learning all the time. It's not always perfect, but the hardest part about working in an agency, but also working in this new model, is the people. It's the human element, right? Everyone's got their own desires and personalities, and so managing that's always been the hardest part of marketing, I think, in my mind.
Yeah, it sounds great. And again, the reason I was fascinated when I learned about your model ties into what we spoke about earlier on AI, and the fact that this idea of like a 9 to 5 may not always be there. And so to have these types of agencies or firms, or however you want to describe yourself, where people can jump in and out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as needed. You know what? Hey, we need you for this. Are you willing? Are you interested in being a part of this project? And people can say yes or no, and they'll have that freedom. And I think that will create like some amazing things, because it'll be so voluntary, and it'll be because there's a passion, and it just thinking about the possibility of that, of all of that, is very exciting to me, where we are going to have an opportunity to move towards this futurized work model, where you can work on things that you're genuinely interested in and passionate about, and that contribute back to society in good ways.
And be paid well for it, right? Like that's the thing. It's not. You're not getting a certain hourly wage. You're getting the price that you set for the work that you do because of the years of knowledge that you have, right? So the value is there for everybody, and the model is built on this concept I've coined the infinite sum model. But, where traditional agencies are a zero-sum game, right? You have pitches, and there's one agency wins, and within that agency, the people that really win are sort of the more senior people, or the shareholders. I believe that there's enough opportunity and there's enough work out there, and there's enough desire by clients to work with people that really know what they're doing. And one of the biggest gripes is agencies will roll out all these big important people at the pitch, and then once they win the business, you never see them again, right? We actually have those important people. They're the ones rolling up their sleeves doing the work. And so I think really generating value for everybody. There's a way that we can all win here. And I'm really trying to find that sort of really middle ground, that common ground where we can provide the community. Freelancing's challenging. It's tough when I'm someone who has always been able to, sell, right? But, if you're a creative or a copywriter, it's not in your nature necessarily, or you have a lot of anxiety trying to sell your services, or now you have a platform to help you do that. You have people you can turn to who have been doing this for a long time. They can, if you have to go chase a client for payment, it can be quite daunting if you're by yourself. But now you've got this sort of company, this agency behind you who can help you go do that. And so there's a lot of sort of benefits for the consultants. There's a lot of benefits for the clients. And I think we can all, do well without having to be too greedy.
Yeah. No, it, again, sounds amazing. And what I believe will definitely be a fairly large chunk of the future work model as these new technologies roll out, and as people, are able to explore different opportunities and discover new things about themselves, perhaps hidden talents, because your agency is predominantly for marketing. But there may be others who set up agencies for different things, right?
Yeah.
You can have, I don't know, an agency for like data analytics and stats and so on and so forth. And it's all about the people that are here are genuinely interested in this work. And, they may not, again, want that strict 9 to 5 or a job that they have to go to every day. And now it's, you come in when you're ready, and we have some projects here for you to work on. So I think all of that is very exciting. And for people who do have a bit of wariness around technology and AI and where it's headed in the future, especially as it impacts people, things like this alleviate some of those fears where it's like, okay, there are some great things to look forward to as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we have members that are, on maternity leave, right? Or they've stepped away from corporate life for a while, and they're just trying new things. There's people that are fully employed that, have side hustles and just consult because they want to lend their expertise. And we have people that build their whole business within our platform and are able to, generate, quite a lot of business. So it's trying to be all things to all people. And I was always told, like, you can't make everyone happy, but I'm sure going to try, like I'm sure it's sort of in my nature to try to please everyone. It drives the people that know me, it drives them nuts that I'm like that. But I think there's an opportunity for us to organize ourselves differently as workers, as employees. And we're starting to see that in the corporate world too, right? Like with COVID, it sort of forced people to realize that, silos in businesses don't make a lot of sense, right? If there's an issue in a business, it's not an HR issue. It's not a IT issue. It's the business. It's the company's issue. And if the team that can best solve the issue is probably a combination of HR, IT, and all these different departments. And so rethinking how people operate, even within corporations, is changing. And it's really interesting to see that we're, a lot of the work we do is fractional. So we'll put people directly inside the company and we'll help them sort of organize themselves. You don't have to hire a person necessarily on a full year's salary and all the insurance, and it takes sometimes 6 months to hire a senior person of any quality. And then even then they still might not like it and they might leave and you've wasted all that effort. I mean, there's a lot less risk in these kinds of models as well, where it's like, well, let me trial you out first. Let me see if this is actually a position we need to hire for. Let's get someone in who knows what they're doing. And we're seeing a lot more of that too. And AI is becoming, we talk about perspective and we bring different perspectives around the table for clients. AI is one of those perspectives, right? Like it's one of the tools. It's one of the seats at the table now. And technology will continue to be implemented across these organizations. It's just going to be interesting to see its impact. It's going to be interesting to see just how it's leveraged.
Definitely. Jamie, thank you. This has been a very insightful conversation.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Of course. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, like, and subscribe, and we will catch you at the next one.